Daniel, whenever you're ready, I'm ready.
Sure, if you want to introduce me or whatever.
Sure, okay. Well, we'll go ahead and get started and see if anyone else joins us as we go along. I am recording. Let me take off my scarf here. Recording. Thank you for the for joining us for our second annual bi-weekly quarterly Zoom brown bag. And today we're going to take a look at some of the great work that Nebraska Public Media has been doing around Title IX. And my colleague on the Midwest Newsroom, Daniel Wheaton, is going to lead the conversation, but he's also invited Elizabeth Rembert and Will Bauer, to share their insights. Their piece was an investigative piece, and what I like a lot about this collection of stories is that it runs the gamut from cultural to educational to investigative to professional. There's just a lot of angles to how Title IX has played out over the years, and I think it's going to really be instructive for others if they have thoughts about doing this work. Again, Title IX turns 50 in 2022, so there's plenty of time if you think you might want to delve into this subject matter. And if anyone else everyone from the Midwest Newsroom is on, so we'll just do a quick introduction of folks there. And because we have a small group, maybe we'll do just go around the room. Why don't we start with Kayvon? Want to say hi?
Yeah, we might be getting double Holly because we're in the same room.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, my name is Kayvon Mansouri. I'm the investigative reporter with the Midwest Newsroom. Today is, I believe, my third day at work, and I'm just getting started on some investigations. I came here from the Belleville News Democrat in Southwest Illinois, where I was a government accountability reporter, and now I'm here. So excited to get to work.
Next on my screen is Daniel.
Hi, I'm Daniel Wheaton. I'm the data journalist for the Midwest Newsroom, and I'm based in Nebraska Public Media.
Next on my screen is Dennis.
Hi, I'm Dennis Kellogg. I'm the news director with Nebraska Public Media.
And we have, after Dennis, Steve.
Steve Bachrach. I'm the editor of the Midwest Newsroom. I'm based in Kansas City.
Then we have Chris.
Hey everyone, Chris Husted. I am the senior content editor for the Midwest Newsroom. I'm based out of Iowa Public Radio, but I live in Missouri.
And I'll go over to Elizabeth. Want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Elizabeth Rembert, and I report on agriculture here at Nebraska Public Media for Harvest Public Media as well. And I got to be involved in this Title IX project.
Great. Next, I have Will.
I am Will Bauer, or William, if you prefer. I don't really care. I'm a general assignment reporter and producer at Nebraska Public Media.
Great. And I see Kate Payne.
Yeah, I am the Eastern Iowa reporter for Iowa Public Radio. I'm in Cedar Rapids.
Great. And we have Mark Corbett, who I kind of introduced already.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Mark Corbett. In my normal life here at the University of Missouri, I do our investigative reporting class and some related and some state government coverage.
Great. Suzanne.
Yeah, hi, I'm Suzanne Perez. I'm the education reporter here at KMUW in Wichita.
Thanks, Suzanne. Then we have Bill.
Good afternoon, Bill Kelly with Nebraska Public Media, and I'm a senior producer here doing both radio and television work.
I see Nancy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nancy Finken, and I'm the Chief Content Officer in Nebraska.
Great. Hi, Nancy. Grant.
I'm Grant Gerlach. I'm a reporter for Iowa Public Radio based in Des Moines.
There's Melissa.
Hey, I'm Melissa. I'm a general assignment reporter for Nebraska Public Media.
And Michael.
Hi, Michael Leland, News Director at Iowa Public Radio. I'm in Des Moines and I'm off video, so you don't have to watch me eat.
It is a brown bag, but after all. And I'm Holly. I'm the managing editor of the Midwest Newsroom. Did I get everybody? I hope so. But without further ado, I'll let Daniel take it away.
Hi, everybody. And just for the record, this is, informal, so feel free to jump in, ask questions, and I encourage my Nebraska folks to speak up and provide their perspectives as well. So let's just start it off with the kind of title video showcasing what we're doing at Nebraska Public Media.
Nebraska Public Media celebrates more than 5 decades of social change, a revolution for women, the passing of Title IX. A year-long celebration begins with the 50th anniversary of the NSAA Volleyball Championships.
6 in a row for Scott!
Followed by the groundbreaking inaugural season of high school girls wrestling. And in May, our coverage culminates with an exciting 90-minute program featuring a panel of Nebraska women who paved the way and helped change the game. Follow this important conversation all year long on Nebraska Public Media.
Yeah, so that kind of sums it up. It's this subject has so many angles to it, and obviously this is kind of the TV element, so it focuses a lot on the sports elements of it. But with Title IX being so broad, there are so many story ideas, and the first wave of stories that the news department did kind of encompasses a little bit of everything. We have everything from features on sports to issues about sexual assaults, pay inequity. So pretty much any way you could slice the gender issue, we had our first crack at it. So just to kind of begin, we are calling this Title IX More Than a Game, which encompasses kind of the entire universe of all the stories that all of Nebraska Public Media is doing. And given that this is such a broad subject and we have, so many different talented people at Nebraska Public Media, we have a multifaceted approach of addressing this story. So just to start off, here's, the actual Title IX law itself, just to kind of get that out of the way. We're all probably familiar with the language with the on the basis of sex stuff. So just to kind of get an understanding of how we organize this, I asked Dennis to kind of explain how we got here, and I see Nancy joined as well. So when you kind of explain some of the ideation that we did in the beginning of this process, because this is such a large subject, how do you, get all these angles addressed when we're, thinking about story ideas?
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, this conversation started early in 2021. Nancy Finken brought it to us, and we did a lot of brainstorming. That's really how it all started. And we did a lot of thinking and a lot of talking before we even did any of the doing. So we had a lot of it planned out in advance, and it really will be a work in progress because the 50th anniversary is actually 2022. So we've got a jump start on it as we started some of our coverage this month. And Daniel's going to focus a lot in this webinar on what we did in news, which was an 8-part series that just wrapped up this week, as a matter of fact. But I wanted to just mention that this really is an organization-wide effort. In addition to what we're doing in news this fall, we'll do another series on this in the spring as well. But even we do a lot of television sports coverage. We're a joint licensee. So we do a lot of sports broadcasts, and we just did some of the state high school volleyball championships, and you saw some different feature stories that we worked in there about Title IX. Also, we have a magazine program called Nebraska Stories, and they'll be doing a 30-minute special as part of their winter spring season that starts in January on different Title IX stories. I went out and did an interview with the University of Nebraska at Kearney women's coaches. The head coach is married to her assistant coach. And so that's a husband and wife team. And that was just kind of a unique angle. So that'll be one of the features in that Nebraska Story special. We're also going to be doing a 90-minute discussion program over on campus at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln that'll really dive into some of the issues and how Title IX has changed and impacted, in particular, athletics at the university and across the state. That'll be coming up in May, and we're going to be bringing back some of the top female athletes in Nebraska history to participate on that panel discussion. So that'll be great. We're also doing interstitials for television, just a series of short 3 to 5 minute feature stories that will run in between programs. And the other thing that I think we're really emphasizing is that we are asking for input. So if on our website, you'll find that we're asking for everybody's stories, and we already have started to receive emails and people reaching out to us and saying, hey, this is what it was like for me when I started playing women's athletics back in 1970 or whatever. And the stories have really been fascinating. It's a great way to get story ideas, story tips for things that we can follow up on as well. So as far as the news production, Daniel's going to get into that, but we spent a couple of months producing the stories. And as I mentioned, we just rolled the first set of them out this week. But the one thing I've emphasized with our news department is this doesn't just have to be a series of stories in the fall and another series in the spring. We want to continue to cover Title IX as those issues and stories come up throughout this year and well into next year as well. So anyway, that's just a big overview of about what we're doing as an organization.
Mm-hmm. Anything you'd like to add, Nancy?
No, I think you covered it, Dennis and Daniel. That's fine. Thanks for asking, though.
Thanks. So moving on to the actual stories that we produced, and kind of looking at the entire range, it's really impressive that Title IX is one of those subjects in which you kind of get the both ends of journalism, in which you get the feature stories that are really emotional and powerful, and you get the investigative stuff. And that's what is displayed here. So we led off with Jackie Ureta's first story, which is about the history of Nebraska volleyball, which, as most of you probably know, is kind of a huge deal in the state. So it kind of makes sense to start off with something that people have that connection to and already know a little bit about. And Bill Kelly also did stories about how Title IX affected high schools with the Minden lawsuit. And he also wrapped up the series with what's coming next, which is the fact that Chadron State will have, they've just started their first wrestling team at the collegiate level for women. And that's, a sign of, more participation across all sports and all genders. And that's really powerful. Anything you'd like to add, Bill, about your stories, given that yours were kind of somewhat more feature and sports centric?
Maybe one thing with the Chadron State wrestling story, that actually was a late entry and wasn't necessarily going to be part of the agenda, but during one of the feature interviews, a woman who had helped get Chadron State's women's athletics program started just mentioned in passing that Chadron was starting women's wrestling, and there had not been very much publicity about it, if any, back here on the eastern end of the state. And it ended up being a really strong feature in and of itself, with great personalities and the like. And I think maybe that's something to emphasize is, while this is a 50-year anniversary, things are continuing to evolve really quickly in this area. With it's continuing to be viable. And I know Will and Elizabeth are going to talk about the sexual assault aspect as well. That these are very current, very contemporary stories right now.
Yeah, and I really liked your Minden lawsuit story as well, which basically walked you through the history of the lawsuit that really brought Title IX down to the high school level. And it's really interesting to kind of look at the time period of time when that happened, which was about, I believe it was 20-ish years ago and now, and just how so many things are taken for granted when even after Title IX was on the books for more than 25 years, things weren't still equitable in high schools. So it is kind of, impressive that not only your reporting covered so many parts of the state, but also it kind of hits those different slices of high schools. You have the state colleges, which are a lot smaller. And of course we hit, the main Nebraska stuff, but we really kind of spread across the entire state and the different slices of the state to kind of tell this story from a true kind of broad Nebraska perspective. Cool. And then moving on to some of the more kind of more newsy, more investigative stories. There's the sexual assaults kind of roundup that Will and Elizabeth worked on, and I teamed up with Melissa Rosales on the wage gap story, which basically I wanted to take this series kind of a step further because Title IX is all about equal access. But it's kind of a shame that after all these years of theoretically equal access, women still aren't paid the same. So even though it was kind of the loosest connection to the Title IX series, I felt like it was an important thing to kind of illustrate that it takes more than just passing a law to make things equitable. People have to actually fight for equal pay, which is something that's still happening. And we'll move on to the next section, which is covering the sexual assault lawsuits. And Will, can you kind of give us a 101 of what happened at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and kind of the impetus for this story?
Yeah, so ever since my junior year of college, which is not that long ago, it's probably 2 years ago, we'd always kind of heard about grumblings about the Title IX office, lots of just, you didn't hear good things about it. And so most notably, there was a former volleyball player who had signed on to a lawsuit against the NCAA, alleging a number of things. Nebraska was named in that, mostly Title IX concerns. Later that semester, 2 players were removed from the football team. We had no idea why. And then ESPN broke a story later that semester. I think the players were removed in September from the team, and ESPN broke the story in December that they had actually been charged and arrested on counts of rape and sexual assault of a few different women. So there's all of that. And then there comes these 2 lawsuits, along with a separate criminal case against the 2 football players, and then 2 lawsuits. One of them has 9 women alleging the university mishandled reports of sexual assault in their Title IX office, didn't go through proper procedures, et cetera, et cetera. And I think one of the reasons why Elizabeth and I really wanted to tell this story is because for whatever reason, ESPN had been the only news source telling these stories. The papers in the state, like everywhere else, don't have a lot of staff, but for whatever reason, people weren't telling these kinds of stories. So we just thought it was a big story because look at Baylor and Michigan State, for example. They're important stories to tell. And so we just felt like ultimately this deserves some time. And so we started looking into it. Elizabeth?
Yeah, so I think that an early realization that we had upon reading through like over 100 pages of court documents was that we needed to explain what was being alleged and what was actually happening in the lawsuit in an extremely clear and easy to understand way. And so we identified some main points that we really wanted to come across in our story. And those were, what was the university accused of? What did the developments in the case signal about the chances of its success? What were its chances of success? And then what could success or failure mean for the future of the university? Like what kinds of changes could be made? We talked to a lot of outside experts who could help us interpret what was going on in the case. And I think that that was a really valuable perspective to have because we could get that still knowledgeable perspective in a more objective way than just talking to the attorneys. And they were also able to provide like very clear language on what some of the developments meant. Like the DOJ came in and made a statement about what they thought about the case. And the expert that we talked to was able to say, this is a good sign for the plaintiffs versus the kind of vague language that the attorneys tended to use with us. I also liked having the Title IX consultant, her perspective. She pinpointed some things about the lawsuit that she found, like the claims of the lawsuit that she found particularly egregious. And I think that that helped kind of really hopefully drive the point home of what the university is alleged to have done, instead of it just kind of getting lost in the story and kind of all of the claims that the lawsuit was making. I think that we realized early on that this wasn't going to be a huge scene story since it was mostly legal. And Daniel brought up the point when he was designing our graphic that maybe we could have portrayed the university in some way, maybe gone to campus and gotten some scene sound from there, but maybe that could have painted the university in a more incriminating light, especially since most of the assaults that happened in these lawsuits didn't take place on campus. So we had that on the top of our minds. But we were able to talk to one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit, and hopefully her tape brought some emotion and color to the story so that it didn't just completely become a very dry legal story. And then the only other thing that I would say is it was really helpful to kind of do this comprehensive look at these lawsuits, because now we understand what's going on in them, and we also have made these contacts. So I think that that'll be really valuable as they continue to develop and we can keep reporting on this.
And could you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you faced translating this for an audio story? Because this is one of these stories in which the web and the audio version are markedly different.
I think that there were some areas where we decided to go more vague than detailed. Like there was some complicated legal jargon about what types of claims the plaintiffs were trying to make and their argument. And so we decided that we would put those details into the web, but in audio, we would kind of just talk a little bit, like obviously it's still accurate, but just a little bit more generally instead of dragging listeners down into the weeds.
Cool. Anything else to add, Will?
I guess the one thing that I will add, Elizabeth kind of alluded to it. We didn't bring a whole lot of new information to light, which is perfectly fine because I still think with the series, it deserves some time, right? People need to know what's happening in these two lawsuits, et cetera, et cetera. But I think we're at a point now where we have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen next. And Elizabeth and I have positioned ourselves to break some pretty big news if stuff does happen. So, even though it wasn't like, big groundbreaking story or whatever, we set ourselves up in a pretty good spot that we can make some stuff like that happen in the future.
And did you guys get any feedback from listeners on the story?
I didn't in particular.
When I sent it out to like the, Sheridan, who's the plaintiff that we talked to, she said that she really liked it. The attorneys for this case really liked it. We sent it over to the university. They didn't give us any feedback on that. So not sure how, Leslie Reed feels, but yeah, it seemed to be good.
Yeah, I mean, with stories like these, it's really difficult to kind of have that balance, but luckily you did have that one source that did provide that emotion. So it did kind of round out the stories. Just opening it up, does anyone have any questions for Will and Elizabeth before I move on? Holly's raising her hand. Go ahead.
I wonder what, if you had your dreams come true with this story, what would you have wanted to include?
An interview with the university would have been great, but of course they're not going to talk about it. So that was another struggle was, how do we make sure that this is balanced when all we got from the university was 4 sentences? And it was, all they've said in the last 2 years has been variations of those 4 sentences. So in an ideal world, we could have had a real person on the other end, but you work with what you get.
I do think, though, that I've done some previous reporting on this situation at the university when I was at the student newspaper here, and just reading through like the way that universities tend to defend these types of claims against their Title IX lawsuits, they usually say something along the line, or at least in my experience, they've said something along the lines of, this is not an office. This is not a victim's advocate office. This is a neutral, like we investigate equally on both sides. And that's where people don't understand that. And that's where they get upset. So I think just knowing that and having done that research, that kind of hopefully like helped Will and I ask the questions of, this is what they say. What's your response to that? To some of our sources who would talk to that to us to hopefully get that perspective a little bit into the piece.
Yeah, I do think that the Title IX office is a misunderstood and not very well understood place unless you actually have interactions with that particular office. Follow-up question, co-reporting can be a challenge. How did you all divide the labor? Who did what? And how did you kind of fit it in with your other duties?
I don't know if we had a set, Elizabeth, jump in here. I don't know if we had a set like, Will's going to do this, Will's going to do that. It was kind of just like Elizabeth and I know each other. So it was just like, oh, I can do this. And the one nice thing about co-reporting was I got busy with the Attorney General office 2 weeks ago, released a big report about sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. So I got pulled away to do that. And we had our big interview scheduled with the victim in this story. And so I couldn't do that, but we have a co-reporter, Elizabeth, could just hop on and do that interview, and it was perfectly fine. So there's some like pros and cons to it, but for the most part, it was, we would kind of just, write sections here or there, or I would do an interview and I would send Elizabeth the transcript or vice versa. I don't know if there was any rhyme or reason to why we did what we did, but it worked, I think.
Yeah, I don't think we had divisions of labor. I did say when we talked about this just at at Nebraska Public Media, I did say that it was really helpful to have another person working with me on this, because like I said, we went through all of those really complicated court documents, and it was so great to be able to talk that through with another person instead of it just you just trying to understand it in your own brain. It was really helpful for me to understand what was really going on.
Yeah, and certainly with these kind of legal stories, having two reporters kind of gives you an automatic peer edit, as two brains are deciphering this thing. And I think especially on this kind of story, which is extremely sensitive, that really helps kind of even out the process a little bit. Cool.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I think we're good. So moving on to the wage gap, which is a story that Melissa and I did together. And we had a little bit more defined division of labor. Given this was a data story, I did all that work, and I teamed up with, not really teamed up, but I had a couple sources at UNO CPAR, which is kind of a part of the Census Bureau that's teamed up with universities. And I just wanted to make sure I was using the right data. So kind of early on, I had conversations with them to make sure I was, having the right queries. I wasn't actually making a mistake or anything like that. So that was really helpful to make sure that I was using the correct data when doing this story, because anything with census, it can be different depending on how you slice it. And having that in the beginning was really helpful. So inside the story, we had several charts, which was, of course, the kind of top level one, which you're seeing here. I also had it broken down by the frequency of kind of income brackets. And you basically see that there are more men that are in the higher income brackets than women, percentage-wise in the population, as well as broken down by degrees and age. So you could see that when people typically start out working, there tends to be more equitable pay. But after raises and after people change careers and maybe take off time because of parenting, ultimately that wage gap gets bigger. So we presented different slices of this story online, which I think really worked, just because I don't want to throw a ton of numbers at people. I prefer numbers to be inside of the graphic instead of, in words. And I think that was a way of achieving kind of balance in this story. But Melissa kind of took the lead in some of the reporting. She used her networks to find a really interesting source of a woman who was underpaid when she was a teenager, and then she asked for a raise and got one. And she did that scene, which kind of really helped make sure that our story wasn't just kind of, thinkers and kind of the boring, dry stuff. We actually had an actual person kind of anchor this story, which I thought was really strong. And we also spoke to a lawmaker, Senator Pansy Brooks, a lot of P's in that name. And she's working on a bill that prevents employers from asking previous salaries, so they can't shortchange people just because someone had a much lower pay than another candidate. So we had all these elements in the story. We had the lawmaker, we had the actual person, and then we had experts and advocates. So it's kind of everyone you'd want to have in this kind of discussion of what's going on with this issue. And Melissa, anything you want to add?
Yeah, hi. I guess with this story, I remember, because we decided to going back to what Daniel was saying, we really divided up the labor. Daniel gave me more control with the audio, but what was nice is, you can actually literally see me. We're like literally across from each other. So I remember he would hear me when I was going through the audio, and there were points where I was trying to figure out, especially with Megan Stout's audio, because it's so hard to fit everything in a short amount of time. You have no idea how many times you had to edit this down so much. And there was a point I even considered cutting down Megan Stout's part. But Daniel made a really good point of, she is the anchor of the story. It's the only way that we can keep the listeners wondering. And she was a great way of like for people to understand and relate to the story more. And I mean, I had to drive to where she was working at a bar that was after work, and I literally had to sit there for like 30 minutes. The first 15 minutes was just me sitting there and waiting for her to have a chance to talk to me. So, but I think it was worth it. And yeah, I'm glad it worked out, especially with the way we were trying to have a conversational style.
Yeah, and I also interviewed someone who lives in Western Nebraska to get that kind of rural perspective. She didn't really have the best tape, but is able to use it in the digital story. And I think it was nice just making sure we had, all of our T's crossed and I's dotted online, and had a very conversational story that aired. Basically, it was just kind of like a mega two-way, I guess, between us, in which we went back and forth, and only had as you would do, the best clips of these people who knew all the data stuff. So it was that nice balance of it was conversational, it was informative, but it didn't hit you over the head with too much numbers, which I think is, going to be the challenge of my role in the Midwest Newsroom, of how do we communicate numbers in a way that makes sense, is correct, and also is conversational. So I think this was a really helpful story for me to test out that kind of way of communicating, because, you can't just look at a chart on radio, unfortunately. Cool. And moving forward, basically what we published so far is kind of like the first salvo of this Title IX series. We have plenty of things that are coming in the next couple of months and into next year. And I think it's really awesome that we're able to kind of pair our coverage with what we normally do with high school sports, because we get the chance to further educate Nebraskans on Title IX, and also tell them history that they may have heard of, but finally get that kind of, here's what you really need to know about those change makers 50 years ago who really changed, equity in sports, and also kind of established the dynasty of Nebraska volleyball. And I think that's something that people, may know somewhat in passing, and it's really awesome we're finally able to communicate that in a more powerful way. But yeah, pretty much every element of Nebraska Public Media is doing something related to Title IX in the coming months. The plans are still kind of coming together, but I'm really excited to see what TV and what our interstitials and everything looks like in the coming months, because this is one of these rare subjects that is just so broad that we can just kind of keep the ball rolling until 2022 is all over. That's pretty much everything that I had. So I guess for other stations, I see a couple people from KCUR, and I think Michael is still on. What do you think would be helpful for you guys? Like, which of these stories do you think would be good for you guys to replicate in the coming months as we actually hit this 50th anniversary?
Hi, it's Michael. I don't have a quick answer for you. I think that, obviously things that look at, I do like the way you brought in some of the broader topics like equal access and wage gaps. I think that's going to be relevant no matter what state you're in. And then, we have had, access questions in sports here in Iowa, even still, certainly around like wrestling, which is wildly popular in Iowa, but still, and Kate knows more about this than I do, still trying to get a foothold as a girls' sport in the state and even on the collegiate level.
Yeah, and certainly the fact that Shadron is finally in the ring at that level is kind of like a ripple effect. So changes that occur here are likely to affect Iowa as well.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, just with the girls wrestling, I feel like we have seen other schools starting to add it. The University of Iowa announced recently they'll start a women's program, which is, big news because of their historic role with men's wrestling and Olympians, etc. But there's still like squabbles over the sanctioning of high school level girls wrestling and like competing kind of organizing bodies. But yeah, I was very interested in y'all's findings for the sexual misconduct investigations as well. I think that's definitely always something to look into.
Yeah, that's certainly something that's happening all across the region. Like you had those protests in the beginning of the fall semester, and I think it was KU and UNL over fraternities that had sexual assaults reported inside. So this is a story that's certainly not going away.
One quick footnote on the wrestling. Also, the Chadron State coach was actually lured from Indian Hills Community College in Coralville, Iowa, in part because of Iowa's failure to sanction high school girls sports. That there was, he felt like there was actually a little bit better opportunity in Nebraska now that they have sanctioned it here. So there's even an implication that you're losing some talent potentially at the local level, at the collegiate level, and at the high school level by them not approving girls wrestling.
That's a really good point, Bill. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think one of the stories that we're hoping on or doing in the next kind of wave for the news department is just kind of answering the question of what is equity, because it's kind of so theoretical, and how do you properly judge that? And I think that's a discussion that I'm looking forward to having once we finally get to that point.
If you don't mind me jumping in, I grew up in Iowa, and I think an interesting phenomenon in Iowa has been girls high school basketball and what happened with the changing of half court and being only able to dribble 3 times and then you had to throw the ball. So for some of you who don't know that, that's true. They wouldn't let girls run full court in Iowa. You could only run half court, and that started to change. And Iowa women's high school basketball was a huge, huge deal. It was almost bigger than boys basketball. And I don't know if that's still the same way, but the part that's interesting to me and could potentially be a data story is looking at girls' scholarship opportunities and enrollments at colleges after that full court rule was changed, because this was, I don't remember if it was in the 80s that rule was eliminated, and high schools could then have full court play for girls as well as just like boys. And one of the reasons that was cited, as I recall, was that girls were not able to get scholarship offers to play basketball at colleges. So you could have just a phenomenal basketball player, a female basketball player, but because she was coming out of an Iowa high school where she only played half court, she didn't get the same scholarship opportunities. So it really delayed probably, and maybe made some really standout players not be able to go on. So anyway, it changed. And as I recall, for a while, they gave you an option. It was a big cultural thing in Iowa. They didn't want this to go away, and people fought it. Some people did, some schools did. So then you had the option, I think, in the tournament to be half court or not, full court. And anyway, to me, that's an interesting Iowa story.
That's certainly interesting. And I think Steve, you had a question?
Not so much a question, I had a comment. I mean, first of all, the work that you guys did in Nebraska on this issue is really good, really thorough, like a good public service, and a really good opportunity to explore a topic like this. So my hat's off to you guys for the work that you guys did on this. I'm always kind of trying to, well, not kind of, I'm always trying to think regionally for potential opportunities for regional story ideas around Title IX. And I wonder if it's worth trying to do an analysis of, every university's athletics department has to submit to the government an equity and athletics analysis that shows how much money and how much resources and what the participation is for men's and women's sports. And there's an opportunity to do a little bit of myth busting in this, but also see if there's any outliers. Like, a lot of people think that for every dollar you spend on men's sports, you have to spend on women's, and that's not quite true. It has to be proportional with the participation. But I'm wondering if we could look at all the universities and see if there's any that are really falling short on that. I mean, I'm eyeballing Nebraska's report from, I think their most recent one's from like 2020, and they spend about 54% of their aid on men's team sports, but it looks like it lines up with their participation. But But I'm wondering if we could look at all the universities in the 4 states and see if there's anybody who's not doing their job.
I think you have to dig into and look at roster management as part of that.
Right.
So you may see that there's some shifts in offering opportunities for walk-ons in swimming and diving, for instance, in women's sports, to make room for some more scholarship opportunities on or positions on the football team. That's a little bit more of what you're talking about, I think, Steve, to look a little deeper. And roster management isn't anything that happens only in Nebraska. I'm sure it's happening in each of our states. And swimming and diving is one of those that I've heard is where you may have an opportunity to be just part of the workout team. You're not really going to the meets and representing, but they have upped the numbers of lists of who's on the swimming team or who's on the soccer team, fill in the blank. And at the same time, it helps to then up the number on the male side sports. So just one further idea.
That's really interesting to me. I think it would be a great thing to look into. And we have the time to dig into that in terms of a news book as well. I love that idea. I was thinking about the wrestling in Iowa, and it'd be really interesting to do a kind of like a road to girls wrestling or women's wrestling. Like, what does it take to get this off the ground? And it could, could be a good video opportunity as well. I think that could be kind of cool for Iowa. This is great. Thank you all.
Yeah, and I also wonder, like, what does equity also look at it? That's at the smaller universities and colleges as well, because you can make the assumption that maybe because they're smaller, maybe things are more fair, but also if they don't have that spotlight, that's when things could go awry. So I think the kind of reporting we did in Chadron and also on the high school level is also applicable to our smaller institutions across the 4-state region.
Cool. I have to hop off. I'm doing another Zoom. So I'm going to let Daniel wrap everything up if there are any other questions. But thank you all, and I'll see you on the next one.
Cool. Before we wrap things up, is there anything that William or Aaron, you want to say about the stories that you guys did? You don't have to, just throwing it out there.
I guess for Fred and I's story, the National Centers for Education Statistics was a good resource. I did a lot of research. Fred did a lot of the writing, so he would know more about that. But as far as research, I found it really difficult, and I'm not very experienced in researching on subjects like this, but I found it difficult to find current statistics. A lot of enrollment statistics are like 2018 was like the latest for some of them, and I don't know, that can be a challenge. So thinking about ways to find more current numbers could be important for that.
Yeah, it's certainly kind of pulled back the curtain a little bit, realizing how poor some records are kept. Like, went on a wild goose chase for 2 weeks trying to find enrollment statistics for the 80s, and turns out they're lost in microfilm somewhere in Love Library.
I guess for me, it was just really difficult to get people to speak with me. Not so much on the administration side, but getting actual characters for the story, because there's a lot of concerns these days with transgenderism and people being targeted and the fear of people being targeted. And it was tough to secure somebody who was open and willing to talk about their challenges with that issue, but it all worked out in the end, which I'm very grateful for.
Mm-hmm.
I would just throw something out real quick here at the end too, that I think, as Daniel pointed out, the one thing about Title IX that works really well for us as an entire organizational project is it's so broad and you can attack it from so many different angles. But I think you could do that with other subjects too. And I think from a news standpoint, what's really good about this is the reporters get a couple of months to really dig their teeth into something and really do something that's going to stand out and make a difference. And I think that's refreshing as a reporter to be able to do that. So I love the opportunity of giving the team the ability to go out and let's find the topic that we can really make a difference in, and let's go after it. And I think Title IX is one of those.
I would add that it also shows the long tail of a story. Bill Kelly can jump in, but that Minden lawsuit story from 20 years ago or so, if you have your archives in order and you can pull tape from when that first, I mean, that really helped to bring that story alive. As a listener, Bill, I think you covered that for Nebraska Public Media, but even a different show then. And to be able to keep track of something and go back to that proves, I think, one of the qualities of public media journalism is that we're here for the long haul, and we're going to tell you that story across that whole continuum and context.
So the other message is keep your same job for another 40 years, and eventually some of this stuff will pay off for a story idea later on too.
Looking forward to the 2062 broadcast.
I'll be here.
Cool. Well, that's pretty much everything that I had. So thanks everyone for joining and listening to us ramble. And it'll be exciting to see what we do come the actual anniversary year in 2022. So thanks everyone.
Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, guys. Great job.
Thanks.